It has been quite a journey for Michael Coren, from high-profile social conservative through a very public reconsideration of some of those perspectives to now a new vocation. He reflects on much of what he's learned along the way in his new book, Reclaiming Faith, Inclusion, Grace, and Tolerance. And it brings Reverend Michael Coren back to our studio tonight. Reverend Coren, you look different.
Shh.
What's with the collar?
Don't tell people.
No, they're going to see. What's with the collar?
Black is very slimming, thus all those years at seminary. And, I wrote a piece in Maclean's recently about the first 2 months of wearing a collar. I'm just starting to get used to it now. At first, I just thought everybody was most people are indifferent, but I thought everybody was looking at me. Then you sort of get used to it. But it's wonderful what happens because all sorts of conversations take place. And I was in the UK recently, and what I noticed, very strange, was my main constituency of support was drunken men in their 20s and 30s. And seriously, Friday and Saturday night, oi, father, want to have a drink, mate? Come. And it really sort of intrigued me. And I said to a friend, a priest friend, what had happened. And he said, they've either served in the armed forces or they've done time in prison. In those two entities, the only conduit of kindness and gentleness is the clergy. I found that fascinating.
They may need your help, which is why they react so positively to it.
I think a lot of people are looking for something. I'm not going to get all too pious on you. I don't think they're looking for the church as such, but there is a terrible problem of loneliness and isolation, and people are looking for something beyond the tangible.
We will get to that some more. For those who have not followed your journey, why do you have the right to wear that collar now?
Many would question that. Well, I had a profound religious conversion. I mean, the terminology I know can sound a little bit off-putting for people, but my life changed about 5.5 years ago. I'd been a Roman Catholic for many years, a conservative Roman Catholic, and I thought I had to change, and I moved away into a much more, I would say, authentic, many would say progressive Christianity, which is not to criticize the Catholic Church, it was my interpretation of it. In the end, I became an Anglican, which it's rather paradoxical. It's a Protestant church that allows me to be the Catholic I want to be. And a couple of years after that, I went to Trinity College, University of Toronto, to study for a Master's of Divinity, a seminary degree for 3 years. I graduated early this year, and 2 months ago, I was ordained a deacon in the Anglican Church of Canada.
You are a deacon now.
I am a deacon now, Steve.
How about that?
How about it? It must be difficult. I mean, you've known me for a long time.
Yes.
And the optics, I know it can be jarring.
It's not to me, because I've followed your faith journey along the way. I have had people ask me, though, was there one thing in particular that made Michael Coren wake up one day and say, I can't be that anymore, I need to move towards this?
It's a very good question, and I can't really give it a very good answer because I think it was a series, a succession, a number of things. There were certain events in public life that certainly changed me. I was increasingly influenced by gay Christian men. I can be very specific. I can think of half a dozen people in the UK mainly, but here too in Canada, gay Christian men who, I'll be quite explicit, I have probably found that the most Christian people in the gay community, because they've stayed in churches that often have said, you're not really welcome here. Some, not all, but some. And they've remained faithful, and they changed my life. And it got to the point, I didn't have a breakdown or anything. It would be insulting to those who've had to say that, but I was in a state of crisis. I thought I couldn't continue with these beliefs and saying these things in public and hold on to my faith. But if I let go of my faith, then what am I? Where else will I go? So it was a difficult and painful time, and but I deserved it, because change is not just saying I've changed. There has to be penance. Again, I sound a bit too pious, but there has to be penance. There has to be contrition, and you have to show the change is genuine. And for the first year, sure, people questioned me, as they should. More than 5 years later, those who question, I think, just have an axe to grind. But I've never been happier, but I'm not going to pretend it was always a pleasant journey.
Well, I have a quote here from your book which speaks to that right away. When I left the Roman Catholic Church and began to champion progressive causes, I was accused of being an adulterer, a thief, and even a pedophile. My wife was told to leave me, my children's Facebook pages were trolled, and there were successful campaigns to have me fired from speeches and columns. That tone is also starting to shape the public discourse around issues. In many ways, it's a battle for the soul and future of the Catholic Church in Canada. You know, I guess I want to try to better understand why people who are good Christian people don't act that way too much.
Yeah.
Can you help us understand that?
Question down the ages when we think of anti-Semitism, genocide, residential schools, homophobia, misogyny. Christian church, I'm afraid, has often been at the forefront of these ugly, dark campaigns, and there's no getting around that. There's a wonderful book I'd recommend. I should be pushing my own, but by a man called Tom Holland, a terrific, not Spider-Man, a terrific writer. It's called Dominion, and it's a superb book which explores a lot of these issues. The Gospels are really very clear. Gospel values, gospel virtues. If you read the Gospels alone, there's no mention of most of these, abortion and homosexuality and so on. It's about love and justice and grace and revolutionary love, actually, and turning the world upside down and doing things which are almost impossible for a person to do. I mean, really to turn the other cheek, really to carry the bags of an occupier and to love that person. It's extremely difficult. I think because of the difficulty, people try and package it and interpret it in a way that's more livable. And then they get into all sorts of very bad areas and murky waters. And there is a difference, a dichotomy between legalism and love. And the teachings of Jesus are so soaked in love, but then there's the legalism. And it's not just in the Old Testament. You can see some of it perhaps in parts of the New Testament too, in the writings of Paul. I think if the writings of Paul are fully understood, they're not legalistic. But if you just take the surface interpretation, it can be very problematic. And then the siege mentality. If you're not part of us, you must be a problem, you must be an enemy. And I was part of that. To a certain degree, I was standing at the corners, keeping the doors closed. You have to have the right beliefs. I've said that many times. I've never tried to deny it. It's about extending the circle of love so far that almost everybody can be included. Some people choose not to be. Some people choose not to be.
But you were a Christian before, and you're a Christian now. You pursued Christian values then, you pursue Christian values now. How are those two people different?
It's a very good question, because I think the person is different. I was wrong. It's made me more empathetic, of course, to people who I think still are in that place. But I don't think I was a hateful person. I think as an individual, I was quite a nice, kind person. But some of the teachings I was repeating in public places, I had a TV show and a column and so on, caused great harm, particularly to the gay community, because that was one of the central issues. I always supported civil union, but I opposed equal marriage. Today, this morning, a dear friend of mine, his partner died. This man's probably more of an influence on me than any other Christian. I don't want to go into too many details, but his partner died. And I heard this morning very early, and it broke my heart. I knew he was dying. I didn't know it would happen this quickly. Anyone who questions the godliness of a loving, committed same-sex union doesn't understand God and doesn't understand the gay community, and how actually this issue is largely irrelevant. Love is love. It's not the gender of the people involved. It's the nature of the love and the commitment. And I failed. It wasn't, Christianity didn't fail. I failed as a Christian. I didn't make that leap, which has to be a commitment to love, love, and love again. And it's not easy. Anyone who thinks it is, it's not easy. It's not easy when you try and help someone, they spit in your face. My instant reaction, again, you know me pretty well, is not to say, oh, bless you. My initial visceral reaction is to be quite upset about that. But you have to do better. And I didn't do better 5, 6 years ago. I failed repeatedly. Not always, but repeatedly. And I hope I learned my lesson.
How well is the current Pope doing on this scale?
Mixed. He's very good in many ways, and I think he's a progressive. He's also an Argentinian man in his 80s with a lot of those attitudes. I think on issues of sexuality, he's sent out mixed messages. On the one hand, he seemed very inviting, and you're welcome here. On the other, some of the new rulings and regulations are stricter than ever. So it'll be the next Pope, I believe. The College of Cardinals has been influenced in a certain way. I think it'll be the next Pope, a younger man, because for the Catholic Church to change fundamentally, well, it has to ordain women, and that won't happen in my lifetime. I don't know if it'll ever happen. Certainly married men, that could happen fairly soon. It has to the patriarchy has to be unpacked. It has to be less secretive, less elitist in terms of the clergy. A lot of things have to change.
You do mention numerous times in the book that the Bible has precious little to say about homosexuality.
Yeah.
But evangelical Christians and Pentecostals and conservative Roman Catholics today, have plenty to say about homosexuality, a lot to say about it. Why is there this disconnect?
I've said this before, that if a Martian landed and was given the Bible, they would say, oh, this is the book that's all about homosexuality, isn't it? It's mentioned about 5 times. Lesbianism is never mentioned in the Old Testament at all. Jesus never refers to it. And the mentions, the references in the Old Testament are normally in a package of rules and regulations that nobody would try to live to today. They're deeply misogynistic and strange. Sodom and Gomorrah is not about sexuality. Remember, Lot brings his virgin daughters. Take them instead. That's hardly family values. So it's not about that issue. And the sin of Sodom is mentioned elsewhere in Scripture, and it's not about sexuality. A lot of that was changed in early medieval Europe by the papacy. I think it's because it's become a political issue and a sociological one. And when I changed my views on this, what I found that was most of the anger and hatred, it wasn't about women. It was always about gay men, and it was particularly about one sex act that they assumed all gay men indulged in. And it was very self-revealing. I think there was fear involved and panic. And I don't think it's theological. There's only one possible reference in the Gospels to this issue, and I've written about it, and I'm not a theologian. I wouldn't claim that this is sacrosanct, but it's when, and it's very famous, the centurion goes to see Jesus and says, my slave, and the Greek is very explicit. My slave is very ill, I love him. And it's not passive love, it's about romantic love. I love him, and I'm not fit to enter your house. So you just say the word, I know he's healed. And Jesus says, go, it's done. And then says to him, I wish you lot could be as good as him.
But there's an inference there that the love is the love that cannot speak its name.
Plus, first century Jews would mock the Romans by saying they go back to their barracks in Caesarea Philippi and Caesarea Maritima, and you know what they get up to. So it was a way to mock the powerful. So all of these things brought together, it could well be, it's certainly open to question, this was a reference, and it was known by those around to a same-sex relationship.
Do you think the Anglican Church's position on these issues is more aligned with your own values?
Well, I don't speak for the church or for my diocese, of course. It's a much more democratic institution, so these things are discussed. Now, it depends. In Sydney, Australia, it's much more conservative. In England, it's divided. In Africa and the Caribbean, it's more conservative. I think in Canada right now, the vote at the last synod just failed to marry same-sex couples, but most dioceses do. They're allowed to. It's a work in progress, but it's pretty good. There are openly gay people, clergy in the church in prominent positions. But I was just in England, and gay friends who are clergy, some brilliant men, they know they'll never be made a bishop. They know that.
Your position on abortion, has it changed?
Yes and no. And it's interesting how people will say, well, you've changed on everything. Well, no. I always opposed the Gulf War. I always opposed the death penalty. I always believed in forgiving third world debt. Many issues I couldn't change on. I would like abortion rates to drop. It is not a morally neutral issue. And I know some people will say, no, you're wrong. I have a dear friend with a Down syndrome son in England. She's a Christian. She's quite a well-known actress, actually. She wouldn't align herself with the anti-abortion movement, but abortion is a moral issue in many ways. Make contraceptives freely available, socialized daycare, modern sex ed in schools, empower women, eradicate poverty. The rates will drop. Guaranteed. They have done where this has
been the experience.
Of course. Yeah. Surely most of us would agree with that, but I've never believed in criminalization, even when I was on the other side. You asked me that question many years ago, and I said, no, of course not. And I sometimes wonder if the anti-abortion movement actually wants to reduce abortion rates, because they won't achieve it. There's no way they will. And they're opposed to some of the things I just suggested, which would, apart from being ethical, moral issues, they would increase the decency of human life. They would reduce abortion.
I do remember when Bill Clinton was running for president, he said, I believe abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. You could sign on to that.
I think most people would. But I do get upset when abortion, there is no ethical imperative. I think most of us know, even within, that when it comes to abortion of a disability or gender, yes, we do react in a certain way.
In our remaining minutes here, I would like to get the guy who used to write political columns for the Toronto Sun on this set, as opposed to, maybe not as opposed to, but in addition to the guy with the collar on. Yeah. I want to ask you about the last federal election. There was a very conservative, socially conservative Catholic named Andrew Scheer who was leading the conservative forces in this country. Do you think those views cost him the election?
No, I think they helped to cost him the election. I think he was out of his depth. I feel a bit sorry for him at this point because he won on the 13th ballot by less than 1% of the vote.
His leadership convention.
Yeah. Maxime Bernier, you know far better than I do, was supposed to be the leader. I mean, this is your job, which is why he was so angry afterwards and formed a separate and rather absurd party. But Scheer was as surprised as anyone, I suspect, and I don't think he was fully qualified.
Do you think people with socially conservative views can lead political parties in this country?
I don't know if they can. For example, look, the law, marriage between people of the same sex, that is the law of this country. If even privately you oppose the law, how do you really lead the country? When he said repeatedly, I would not introduce legislation, it's a done deal. Yes, we know that, but there are many other ways to influence Ottawa. What you say to private members' bill, who you give money to, who is appointed as a staffer. And I wrote this in a couple of places, and people, oh, you're being anti-Catholic. No, I'm not. Many Catholics, Paul Martin was very different from this. I mean, we have many Catholic
Paul
prime
Martin
ministers.
continues to be a church every Sunday, staunch Roman Catholic.
Oh, he's a devout man.
And yet brought in the law that legalized same-sex marriage.
I think he had it right. I mean, I don't, as far as I know, Brian Mulroney and Justin Trudeau don't have the same depth of faith, but Paul Martin certainly. But there is a way to handle this. But when Andrew Scheer, he was never able to speak to people and say, look, my views are my views, but believe me. No, people didn't believe him. They always assumed, and his refusal to march in Pride, because Pride is about more now than just celebrating the gay community, and that he would boycott, even after he failed to win the election, I would never attend. That goes to character.
Do you vote?
Yep.
You voted in the last election.
I did.
You want to tell us who you voted for?
NDP.
You did.
Yes, I did.
Now, you live in the West End of Toronto.
Parkdale High Park, with a wonderful Liberal MP, and I felt very bad about it. But yes.
Boy, you really have changed. Now, can you imagine voting Conservative ever again?
Oh, golly. It's not about party politics. And as a deacon, I mean, there are wonderful people in all parties. I can't see myself doing that. But that's just me. For goodness sake, I know wonderful Christian people who vote Conservative.
Do you still hold a UK passport?
Yep.
You do?
I do.
Did you vote in the last British election?
No, I didn't. That would have been too much palaver to get all that organised. I was there just before the election, and I was stunned at the result. There was consensus that Boris Johnson would win, but a lot of people thought a hung parliament. Others thought Corbyn, in alliance with the SNP and the Lib Dems, could form a government. Anyone who says they anticipated that sort of majority is lying.
Would you, who would you have voted for had you voted in that election?
Lib Dem.
You would have. They lost half their seats. They didn't do very well
they
at
did
all.
terribly, but I study British politics. The accusations of anti-Semitism are not without foundation. It's a very...
Of the Labour Party.
In the Labour Party. It's a very, very small number of people. But other Labour leaders, whatever their politics, no matter how left-wing they were, would have dealt with them immediately. Corbyn was far too slow. There is a harshness and an intolerance that has come into the Labour Party, which has put a lot of people off. And it has to reinvent itself in the months to come. And I wish it will, because we need... The Labour Party, it was always said, owed more to Methodism than to Marxism. And to a degree, the NDP is similar. That non-conformist, Tommy Douglas, that non-conformist, radical Christian interpretation of the Gospels. The Labour Party has changed a great deal. A lot of people came in when Corbyn won, and they're not always the easiest of people to get along with.
You know, there have been plenty of people in this country, and others, but in particular in this country, who have worn the collar that you wear and eventually put their names on a ballot.
Yeah, don't look at me.
Well, I am looking at you.
No.
You just mentioned Tommy Douglas, who, of course, was a Baptist preacher. And there have been numerous others. Blakey from Manitoba was a preacher as well. And M.J. Coldwell, the founder of the CCF, was a preacher. And anyway, we can go on and on. Is it nothing you've ever thought about, given your interest in politics?
Well, I never thought about being ordained.
So you never know.
Look, my ambition is still to play for Tottenham. It's not going to happen. In defence these days, maybe. No, I don't like party politics, actually.
Well, you say that, but I think it's fair to say that for a member of you know, you are a minister of the cloth, not yet a minister of the cabinet or of the crown, but you know politics and obviously care about politics a lot more than your average priest. In which case, why would you rule it out?
I think party politics diminishes one's ability to speak about the profound issues, which is not to criticize politicians, but there's a lot of baggage with me, which will, oh, look what he said in the past, and that's all fine, but I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want to do that to my family. But there's no single party I could back with full commitment. And I don't think politicians are able to discuss the moral issues that I'm most interested in. I think I can do more good in terms of the marginalized and the poor and the dispossessed.
Tell us how.
Well, the direct physical intervention, and a lot of what we do as ordained clergy is to work with people who are left behind. But I hope I can influence, I mean, I'm still writing. I still write a column or two a week. And I hope I can still influence events by speaking out on them from a non-party point of view. I mean, I would never say that one party had the monopoly on truth, and certainly not on decency. There are good people in all parties. But by avoiding party labels, I mean, I'll be honest and explain how I voted, but by avoiding party labels. I mean, Elizabeth May is one of the finest people, I think, in Canadian politics.
And taught Sunday school, another person of faith.
And I think would have gone into Anglican seminary, maybe, if she hadn't gone into politics. But if I identify with a party, if suddenly other people will say, well, that's coming from a certain point of view, I don't want to do that.
So many people of the cloth do in this country. Well, all over the world, I don't have to tell you. Anyway.
They do.
Michael, this is a good read. This is called Reclaiming Faith, Inclusion, Grace, and Tolerance, and it really does describe both the quite astonishing journey you have taken and continue to take, and the impact that you will have going forward. And we are glad that it has brought you to our studio here at TVO tonight. That is the newly ordained Anglican deacon, the Reverend Michael Coren.
Oh, dear.
Michael, thank you as always.
Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.